This week on Dig Me Out.
So let's just stay here, taking the sun and dream of distant rain. So let's remain here, taking the sun and sand gone.
With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, it's a union member. Just at the last moment, he said, I'm not going to be able to join you, but we want to give a big thanks to Chris Bishop. He's the patron for this episode. He's our patron suggestor.
Thank you, Chris.
This album. He joined us last year for Shihad, which was an album we enjoyed, and also a band that got back together and recorded an album.
Yeah,
after we talked about them.
Well, should we take credit for that?
I think we should. we put the positive mojo out there, and they received it.
That's so fun to see a band we had no idea existed, and then suddenly, within a year or so of doing an episode, now I actually recognize that they put new music out.
Right. And we had a good. There was the other band from New Zealand that we liked. There was a couple of New Zealand bands last year that we discovered, and Chris decided to throw us another New Zealand band. And I'm learning that via the comments on the Patreon for this episode, that other people are learning about New Zealand and Flying Nun Records. So Chris's pick is the 1997 album "Take in the Sun" by the band Bike. And Jay, I, like you, probably are not familiar with this band.
No idea. Never heard of it.
Now, what's interesting is if you look at the album cover, is it me or does the font for Bike look like the font for Lit?
It does.
Kind of does. It's weird.
There are two covers for this too. I don't know if you noticed that. Or there were two versions of the same release on streaming, and the covers are slightly different.
I guess I
think the font is the same.
There's a 1997 original release, which came out on Flying Nun. And then there is also a 2006 release on March Records. So that must have been like the digital release.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was only released originally on CD. There was no vinyl or cassette. Just on CD. And I don't believe it has been repressed anywhere. Or repressed, not repressed.
It does have that like 90s like ironic kind of retro sensibility to it.
Yes.
Taking the sun yet. The sun is kind of looks like it's, lighting the whole album cover on fire.
So a little bit about this band. They're from Dunedin in New Zealand. Members were Andrew. I'm going to apologize if I mispronounce these. Andrew Brew, Carl Buckley, Tristan Mason, and Wayne Bell. They only released one album, Take in the Sun, on Flying Nuns Records. Before that, they released a 7-inch single and CD. Save My Life was released on Flying Nun, and then that was also included on the album. And so Andrew Bro previously was in a band called Straight Jacket Fits. I know that name, but I've never actually heard them. Have you heard of them, Jay?
I had heard of them. I have to admit that I always got them confused with, is it Los Straight Jackets?
Yes.
I realize now after listening to this record, I did go back and sample Straight Jacket Fits, and they're nothing like Los Straight Jackets. I can say that. But prior to listening to this record, I had never actually heard them. Only heard the name.
So Straight Jacket Fits was Shane Carter, on vocals and guitar, John Colley on drums, David Wood on bass, and Andrew Bro on vocals and guitar. They put out 2 records on Flying Nun Records, Hail and Melt. And then after Melt was released, that's when Andrew Bro left the band. And he kind of got out of the music scene for a little while, from what I've read, and was just at home, like, writing songs by himself. Thought he put together like a handful of good tunes, got some of his friends together, and they formed what would end up being Bike, and had a fairly well received debut album. And then what was it, in 1999? The band was like touring and stuff, and I guess there was some issues on tour where he was getting into like fights with fans and stuff like that, and so he just quit in 1999 and it completely disappeared, left the music industry, wasn't doing, like, made no public appearances. He just left society, basically, and passed away in February of 2020.
Wow.
So Chris, who's going to be on the show with us, wrote a eulogy for Andrew, and you can find it at pundit.co.nz/content/a-eulogy for Andrew-Bro, BROUGH.
Pretty sure you can Google Chris Bishop and Andrew Bro and you'll
or
find
do
it.
that. I think it's on a
Chris is a member of New Zealand Parliament, so
Yes.
he Googles pretty high. I think
and
you'll
he
be able
wrote
to
this
find him.
in February of 2020, and just talked about what an important songwriter Andrew was via the 2 bands that he was in.
That's very cool.
Yes. So I wanted to make mention. I'm sure we would have gotten to talk to Chris about it, but definitely wanted to make mention of it. So
And we'll put the link in the show notes as well.
Yep. At Patreon, this is why I mentioned about people in New Zealand. Vadim Taver said, last year I went on a dive on a lot of artists on New Zealand's Flying Nun Records, which is essentially their version of the US's Sub Pop, and fell in love with a lot of their bands, most notably Balter Space and the Straight Jacket Fits. Bike popped up in a segment of a documentary on Flying Nun, which I posted above, although I think Andrew Bro's absolute best song is Down in Splendor by the Straight Jacket Fits on Melt. There are some really excellent moments on the Bike album, and there's much more there. But it's cool to see that Vadim was also getting into some New Zealand stuff recently. I think some people, after hearing Shihad and what was it, Big Heavy Stuff, was that the other band from New Zealand?
I thought they were Australian.
Or were they Australian?
Thought so.
I'll have to double check.
I'm checking. They don't come up on our site as New Zealand.
Okay. Maybe I messed that up. Chris posted the link for the eulogy in our Patreon notes. That's right.
Nice.
Martin Gay said they have 211 monthly listeners on Spotify. That's a bit mainstream for me. Some irony there from Martin. So, Jay, let's talk about this record. Tell me one thing you liked about Take in the Sun by Bike.
It's a record that's in a lot of ways sounds very familiar, but also really unique. And I guess you could consider it, a couple flavors of records that I tend to like when we review them blind and having not, having context or hearing them. So it's really interesting in that I hear a lush, psychedelic kind of shoegazy sound at first, but it's also very melodic. It doesn't get lost in that, that aesthetic too much. It's still very strong melodically, both from a vocal standpoint and a guitar standpoint. And then it also has really, I think, examples of songs that have a tight and, you know, really present groove. It's not just kind of a washy, dreamy sound. There's songs like Old and Blue or Save My Life that they've got a really solid drum and bass groove to them that I think gives it this extra, something different.
Up and down, there seems to be a way of losing. Wrap me around your little finger. This time I don't mind. Round and round, there's gonna be a brand new season. After all we've been through, don't you try to save my life. I'm already dead, so let it go this time. Say it, please stand close the door. Don't stand there crying. Catch your breath, it ain't that bad. There's always
The songwriting is also, I think, stands out from maybe just a band that would have a psychedelic or shoegaze style. There's things here that I hear that are very similar or reminiscent to me. Wouldn't say similar, reminiscent, like notes or chord choices or phrasings that are reminding me of like John Lennon or even Badfinger. The Birds a little bit, they get a little jangly here and there. A song like Keeping You in Mind is an example where I'm listening to them, like songwriting wise, is this kind of reminds me of the Birds or Teenage Fan Club or is Blue Oyster Cult or something. There's like this like classic 60s, 70s kind of
Yeah.
songwriting at play here that I'm also gravitating to. So both sonically, there's a lot of stuff that is interesting and familiar to me. 90s-ish, but there's also this kind of classic undertone to where they're coming from a songwriting standpoint. The last thing I really liked was they have this really cool mix of guitars, acoustics, and effects. They're using, I think, chorus, reverb, delay, and then they're combining it with a lot of cymbal and shaker tambourine stuff. I think it's kind of like all layered in this sauce. It's not hitting you over the head, and a vocal that's very breathy with a lot of, or not a lot, but some chorus or something on it. So it does this really interesting thing where, especially in headphones, where those all hit at this same frequency and they kind of create their own like sizzle. Like there's just this interplay going on between these choruses and delays and these shakers and like hearing the guitar strumming that, kind of like play off of each other and kind of mess with your ears a little bit as you're listening to the record. It almost creates like this wave of sound at this sort of middle frequency that creeps in and out and twists and turns. And just sonically, it's a really cool sounding record that I think it is unique in the way that it brings all that layering together to do more than just be a wash. It actually like starts to become an instrument and into itself, which I thought was pretty cool. What worked for you?
Well, you mentioned the guitar stuff, and that was definitely what I was taken with initially because it was covering so many different sounds
Yeah.
and genres that I liked. And when I was reading this, there's a biography of the band that's linked to their Discogs page, and it has like quotes from various interviews that Andrew Bro did around the time, and they asked him about his guitar setup for this, and I thought this was really interesting. He used 2 amps at the same time. He had a Music Man Quad and a Rollins 60, and he wanted to create this like swirl of sound between the two amps, and he was playing them through a Gibson Dot Special 335, which for those who don't know, that's a hollow body guitar,
Right.
which creates even more chaos when you're feeding that through two amps. Plus, he's using, so I can, that's one thing that I really liked listening to this record was just this big blissed out guitar sound on a lot of these songs. This jangle that was very reminiscent of some of the jangle pop we've listened to, like Velvet Crush is a band I heard. And, there was elements of Jellyfish, which always gets brought up when you're bringing up jangle, but more in the in the 90s dream pop or 80s psychedelic dream pop of like that stuff, the Matthew Sweet and early Matthew Sweet stuff, and Let's Active and those sort of bands. Whereas, there are parts of this where I could definitely hear a little bit of Ride and some of that stuff, that sort of shoegaze that's not a big wall of noise like My Bloody Valentine, but more on the groove sort of, Kraftwerk groove for bits and pieces. But then there were like songs that didn't fit into either. Like Welcome to My World had a much different take from a lot of this. And a song like Save My Life, which was, I guess, the big single for this record.
Oh, was it?
If it wasn't like a huge hit or anything like that, but that was the thing that sort of led them. I mean, that has like a Birdsian kind of feel to it. So there was a lot going on here where it touched on things like I hear little bits and pieces of like, I know where this is coming from, but there's also some little bit different takes here and there that don't make it specifically sound like one thing or another. It's just kind of like in the middle of a lot of things.
Yeah, I guess my take on that was then it becomes its own thing.
Yeah.
Which is what's most important. But it's accessible. Like you hear all of these other kind of touchstones that pull you in and help you relate to it. But they're coming from everywhere. It's not just the voice or one guitar, or it's just like as you're listening to the record, you're hearing all these both 90s and I think 60s and 70s influences come together.
Oh yeah, like Inside. I mean, that could be a 90s shoegaze song, or it could have been like a George Harrison solo song. You know what I mean? Like it's depending on how much you turn up the distortion or turn it down and play it on a sitar, I guess. There's stuff that like has elements of very psychedelic 70s or 60s, but then also crossing into like very dreamy pop stuff.
Yeah,
that was.
Yeah, I even heard like they could fit in with a Posies as well at times on this record, where they don't quite have that edge that the Posies can have, and it's not as harmony based,
right?
But it's in that ballpark, so if you like that Teenage Fan Club, Posies, kind of, lush pop with a lot of guitar sound, you will definitely want to check this record out.
What didn't work for you on the record?
I faded a little bit on many of my listens. I found myself, towards, I would say, Inside, Anybody Know. It gets very slow, a lot of slow and mid tempos. It really, the bass and drum parts are important. There's some vocal hooks here and there that pull you back. It lacks, I think, a consistent, every song or every other song moment that just grabs you and pulls you back to the record. I felt like you very much get into this kind of like, and maybe it wasn't the intent, it just is washing over you and you're kind of just going with it. I didn't find myself like actively being drawn back to the record unless I consciously, made an effort to do it. Like, oh
Right.
yeah, I let's pay attention to what I'm listening to. Not that they say it doesn't happen on the record ever. It just doesn't happen. Like, I guess for me, a great record, every song has a moment like that where it won't let you ignore it. If you're working or sort of focus on something else, to me, like, I want a record, an ultimate record to me would be like every song has a moment where it's like, no. Like, you got to pay attention to what's going on here. And it lacks some of those moments consistently through the record. So that's really the only bad, I wouldn't even say bad, but just what didn't work for me.
Yeah,
What about you?
there is a sameness, like you said, to certain sounds and things that happen. I also think that if there isn't really a strong vocal hook, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, a blatant pop hook, but just something that repeats and is melodic, his vocal then sounds like real reedy, or like
Yeah.
it's very thin when it's not doing something really interesting.
Mhm.
He does double it, I think, at times, and that's where you get like the chorus effect with his vocal. But I just feel like it's good enough when the hook's there, but when it's not, it doesn't work that well for me.
Yeah, it's effective when he changes up the cadence.
Yeah.
It's effective when they change up the tempo. So something like Keeping You in Mind it's one of those moments where that kicks in. You're like, whoa, okay, here we go. The tempo's up. The melody's there on the guitar right away. There is a little bit more dynamic to the voice in terms of, it's picking up tempo and going back and drawing out lines and, going faster. And, those little things make a huge difference with the vocal approach to help keep me engaged.
Yeah, and Keeping You in Mind, when that starts, I mean, that could be a Plimsoll song, or it could
Yeah.
be the Angels, or, I mean, you have no idea where that's gonna go.
Yeah, and some of those those melodies in the chorus there kind of sound like Blue Oyster Cult. It's got that little bit of like kind of eerie ghosty quality to it, and the way he sings. He sings in this like almost high register whisper at times. It
Mhm.
seems like
Yeah.
it makes it feel like a little eerie and ghostly. So yeah, I mean, overall, I like the vocal, but I'm with you on the. You can really hear the album come to life. When he changes the cadence, or even like on slide on by, I think is one of the more energetic vocal songs, at least from a chorus standpoint. He's pushing a little bit more, there, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I think this works well as a headphone listen, but I think like this does not work as well as a passive listen, because unless I had it absolutely cranked
Yep.
at like a normal, volume, like a lot of time would pass without really me noticing, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's over." So, but put on the headphones, and it's definitely a different listen. So it's going to be your entry point, I think, for a lot of people, whether they like it or not, based on how they're listening to it. Because there's a lot of, let's hit my pop stand. There's a lot of like layering and stuff that's going on, and the guitar stuff that he's doing is creating some weird movement. So headphones definitely make it
Yeah,
a
it's a
better
headphone
listen.
listen for sure.
Yeah.
There's so much going on from a layering standpoint here that it helps be absorbed in the whole idea, I think.
So normally we would talk about why this didn't do better, but I don't even think this was released in the United States. I think this was just a New Zealand. Oh no, it did get a US release. It got a US release on March Records. March Records. What was that?
Yeah, I'm seeing so I'm looking at the two versions. They're both on streaming. The first version that has the lit logo was released on Flying Nun, and then there's a 99 version that was released on March Records that has a slightly different cover where the font is different.
So March Records was a sub-label of Emperor Norton Records, which was a Los Angeles-based electronica, hip-hop, and dance music label.
What? Okay.
They were both under Rykodisc.
Oh, geez.
So if you're wondering why this maybe isn't well known in the United States, there's your answer. Because nobody knows it came out. So, but for 1997, this has a hard time finding any radio outside of college radio. There's no song on here that's like a 1997 Kiss FM station.
Yeah.
Or the Blitz. Like none of those stations are going to be touching this. Well, there's a vote on this. Let me refresh just to make sure the last couple of votes are counted. But Jay, how are you ranking this? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
It's a worthy album. I could tell, like, as soon as I put this on, it was working on a lot of levels. I don't think there's any, huge misses on the record. I think sonically, it's a statement. I think the song rating is strong. It's not perfect, but I think it's definitely a worthy album.
I agree with you. I think maybe you could axe a song. I don't know which one it would be, but there's nothing really bad. Some of them are just a little samey, but everything is interesting to listen to, both from a musical standpoint and not just in terms of guitar, but bass wise. There's interesting things happening, and it's just weird that like it's very specifically a headphone listen.
Yeah,
like, I don't know that you want to like blast this while you're working out at the gym.
Right.
I don't think that's gonna work. So 57% of the voters at Patreon agreed with us. Worthy album. 43% better AP. So it was a close vote there, but glad we got some votes. Thanks to Vadim, Martin, and Chris. Them for commenting, Chris for suggesting this record, and you can stream it. It's on their streaming services, so you can go check it out.
Yeah,
and
if you're a fan of those bands we mentioned, I would even say if you're into Britpop, you might like this record. It might
definitely
connect with you.
Definitely, if you're and if you're into like the early Blur or the Ride, Swerve Driver, maybe that kind of stuff, I think this would connect with those types of people.
Yeah, this definitely feels like a good Dig Me Out album. Like,
yes,
way underexposed, could really connect with a lot of people, a lot more people than it has, and
yeah,
it's fun to put a light on it.
Definitely. And another way we can shine a light on albums that maybe we don't know about and deserve getting talked about is by going to digmeoutpodcast.com and suggesting an album on our suggest an album form. Put the name of the band, name of the album, write a little bit about them, and send it on over, and we'll put it in the hopper, and it'll get voted on at Patreon. That's where you go to vote on these polls for the albums, and also get to vote in our monthly suggest an album poll. 9 albums every month, suggested by anybody on the planet. Could be Walter Foltermeyer. It could be Axel F. It could be who else was involved in Beverly Hills Cop?
You're on your own. I haven't watched that in 20 years.
I really want to go back and I loved Beverly Hills Cop and Beverly Hills Cop 2 as a kid.
I did too.
It was so inappropriate to watch so young.
I have to say, a lot of the movies that we've gone back and rewatched with Zora, as she's getting older and these feel like age appropriate, they don't stand up as well as I want them to. She's bored by most of them, and I think had I not had the nostalgia and the all the lines already in my head, I'm not sure how much I would be enjoying them either. So that might be one that
it's going to be disappointing when she watches Roadhouse and thinks that that's trash. That's going to be the one that hurts the most.
Yeah.
You can also go to our website to sign up for the Box newsletter. It's a newsletter via email that is sent to your inbox every week with all the new releases of 80s and 90s relevant music, books, movies, TV shows, documentaries that have come out in the last week. And we review a couple of them every week, or our patrons do, because they know more about music than us. And we rely on them to provide better insight than us. So you can also leave us some positive feedback over at Apple Podcasts. 5 stars would be great. Just saying. There might be some kickback in it for you.
You might just get your rating just might bump us up a few slots in Apple's eyes. So
yeah, and then we might send you a heart emoji. Wouldn't you like that? All right.
Or a smile.
Yes. Or a thumbs up. Good job.
Way to go.
For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode. Dig Me Out.